very warm welcome, Susan, to the Scientific and Medical Network webinar platform. I'm very much looking forward to your talk this evening because I think that what you're going to be talking about couldn't be more important. And in fact, I'm having a conversation with some colleagues tomorrow morning on a similar topic about the human self concept and the future of the human self concept, which I'm sure you'll have something to say about. And your book, and just hold this up for people, Artificial You, AI and the Future of Your Mind. And I must say, it's a book I found extraordinarily informative and mind expanding. And I shared your slightly cautious view of the human race as not that advanced. And I think that's one of the issues that we are facing at the moment on all sorts of different fronts, and which you've written about really very extensively, and looking at whether the Musks and the Kurtz files are correct. So Susan is director of the Center for the Future of Mind, and has written a lot about the nature of self and the mind, particularly from philosophy, AI, cognitive science, and astrobiology. And her recent book is on the philosophical implications of AI and the idea of mind design. And this field, as you know, is evolving extraordinarily rapidly. And so it's amazing to have you here, Susan, as one of the world experts in the subject. And we're looking forward to your masterclass. So I'll hand over to you, and then you're able to share your screen, and let's get started.
Hello, and thanks for the kind introduction. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, and we can see Cupid in the background.
Oh, yeah, that's Artemis. Let's see. Okay, so what I'm going to do is share my screen. Just give me 1 second here. I'm just trying to find the
bottom middle.
Okay, I've got the slides. Okay, so now I got to go back. Let's see, we're on Zoom. Okay, just 1 second. There we go. Okay, can you all see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm just going to give, my usual book talk, and we can talk about the different issues that I raise, and, we can talk about anything in the book, really. It's exciting that you're all from such, a diverse range of places. I mean, I'm seeing all kinds of interesting cities and locations, so the conversation should be really fun. Well, what I usually do when I present is I start by reading a certain portion of the book. I'm going to read the first paragraph because it has a thought experiment that I quite like. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so, all right, so this is from Artificial You. It's 2045, and today you're out shopping. Your first step is the Center for Mind Design. As you walk in, a large menu stands before you. It lists brain enhancements with funky names. So Hive Mind is a brain chip allowing you to experience the innermost thoughts of your loved ones. Zen Garden is a microchip for Zen master level meditative states. Human Calculate is a chip that gives you savant level mathematical skills. What would you select, if anything? Enhanced attention, Mozart level musical abilities. You can order a single enhancement or a bundle of several. Okay, so as you can tell, today's talk is on the future of the mind. It's on, the issues that I think can actually happen in the relatively near future. And it's about how our understanding of ourselves, our minds, and our nature could change the future for better or for worse. So today what I'll do is I'll ask the question, at a place like the Center for Mind Design, at some hypothetical center of the future, could you truly merge with AI? Does this even make sense at all? So I'm a philosopher, so I'm I'm very interested in points of contact between philosophy and science. And especially I've always been fascinated by what we can and cannot know, which is really a field called epistemology, the study of the nature of knowledge. And that motivates today's exploration. So here's a roadmap. This is where we'll go today in our talk. First, I'm going to raise some background issues such as transhumanism, what's going on in neurotechnology involving mind design, and then connect it up with age-old questions about who we are. Then in part 2, I'm going to actually urge that there may be some design ceilings on human cognitive and perceptual enhancement that involve consciousness and personhood. And finally, I'll close talking about my work as the recent NASA chair at NASA, discussing my research, well, I won't call it research, my thinking on our place in the cosmos and the road ahead, because I think all these issues are interrelated. So I'm currently writing a book on the future of intelligence. So I'm very interested in the shape of things to come. So I'll offer some speculations. Okay, so part 1 then. Let's turn to background. It's still early here, so I'm drinking lots of coffee still. Okay, so obviously, as you all know, the evolution of our brain was heavily constrained. Just look around at human society to see how constrained it is. Look at American politics, for example. So, we had anatomical, metabolic, and environmental demands on the brain, for example. And I think a lot of us can envision better cognizers. And that's not to say we can actually create them. But I think we can sometimes appreciate that should AI-based cognitive or perceptual enhancement technologies take off, whether that be 100 years in the future or 500 years in the future, there is a potential to augment intelligence at a rate that's much quicker than biological evolution. And if it's done well, which is a big if, we could actually reach perhaps a better, more intelligent point in human evolution. And so, one of the things that motivates my work is actually reaching a point where humans flourish through technology. I think we're actually at a very difficult stage in our evolution right now with AI. So I call this new enterprise mind design. Mind design, upon reflection, is actually a kind of intelligent design, believe it or not. But we are the designers, not some god. So I'm not saying anything that will tick off anyone who believes in evolution. I don't mean, to fight with evolutionary theory. What I'm saying instead, though, is that should we get to the point where we have something like a Center for Mind Design, or should we enhance intelligence not through brain chips, but through, say, gene editing technology? We are entering into the realm of designing future humans and designing the brain. And that, I think, is very humbling, because I don't think we're all that evolved, really. We walk the moon, we harness the energy of the atom, but racism and greed and violence are very commonplace in our world. Overall, it seems like our social development can often lag behind our technological capacities. An obvious example of that is the Manhattan Project. And so I think that the possibility of misusing emerging technologies is a real concern. So I think we need to start thinking then now about the possibility of radical brain enhancement, because this could happen in fairly short order. So let me go through some of these issues in a bit more detail and bring you up to speed with where the technology actually is. But first, let's go back to the center So pretend that you're there, you're staring at the menu. It's like a giant menu like you'd see in a coffee house. And you're waiting in line and someone comes up to you and they say, well, wait a minute. Just before you place an order, just know that I've heard a rumor that if clinical trials go as planned, people will be able to purchase an enhancement bundle called Merge, which is a series of enhancements that will allow you to gradually augment and then transfer all of your mental capacities to the cloud over a period of 5 years. Okay. So let me ask you this. Would you do it? Would you sign up for this if you thought it was medically safe? And if you've had lots of friends who did it, you know, in the past, I mean, would you be interested in doing that? I mean, it's not really all that clear, I think, until one thinks through the philosophy of it. I mean, you can imagine coding a mini column of the brain computationally in some future civilization where we know a ton about how the brain works. I'm not saying we're anywhere near that today, but you could imagine someone coding that into a computer program and telling you that now a particular mental function that computed by a mini column could be computed remotely on the cloud instead of inside of your head. And you might say yes to that. And so what stops you then from doing that gradually to a whole bunch of different mental functions and, you know, a whole bunch of different parts of the brain? And then over time, what stops you from being comfortable with doing it wholesale? I mean, if you've done 80%, why not go all the way? You might really like the convenience of being able to upload and download wherever you want, renting a robot body. So instead of having to fly to Italy, you can just rent an Android body and just go to Italy instantaneously and download into a robot. You know, that could be very convenient for travel. You don't have to worry about your body getting sick, getting some awful pandemic. You know, I mean, it really transforms one's thinking in terms of longevity. In fact, you could, in principle, live until the heat death of the universe. You could have a chair to witness the big crunch, if you will. Okay, so all this might sound neat. And this is what transhumanists have in mind when they talk about merging with artificial intelligence. They see it as a technophile's route to immortality. And I used to be very excited until I thought more and more about it. Well, can you really merge with AI? Well, as a philosopher, there are some preliminaries that I need to look at in order to answer that. First, I would ask, what is it even to merge with AI? And second, isn't a merger too speculative to worry about? Okay, so here's what merging with AI is. So transhumanists are individuals who uphold a certain view that humans can overcome their biological limitations through science and technology. And it's an increasingly influential view associated with the work of Elon Musk, Nick Bostrom, Natasha Vita-Moore, Ray Kurzweil, the late Stephen Hawking, and many others. Now, that view, you know, that we can overcome limitations through biotech is pretty unobjectionable. But the transhumanists, in addition to this, have a sort of trajectory in mind for achieving this that is far more controversial. So namely, as you see on the slide, they say we begin with a sort of unenhanced human, you or I, and then we engage in significant upgrading with cognitive and other physical enhancements, say at a place like the Center for Mind Design. And then over time, we keep doing this. So as new enhancements are rolled out, we just keep adding more and more. We become enthusiasts. And then at a certain point, we're no longer even technically human anymore. We become post-human. So we might not even match the technical definition of a Homo sapien. I mean, there's some difficulty there because it's hard to know what it is to really be human, right? I mean, there are lots of different theories of human nature out there. What is it that's distinctively human? But you get the idea. And then over time, we become what is called superintelligent. So superintelligent AI is a kind of artificial intelligence that's said to outthink humans in every respect: scientific reasoning, social skills, and more. So the idea is that we actually merge with artificial intelligence and become a form of superintelligence ourselves. So we would be vastly smarter than we were when we started, and we would live a very long time if things go well. I suppose you never know, but now, what I want to say before continuing is that you can tell that I'm sketching a very particular view, and there are transhumanists who have nuanced positions. So I'm lumping a lot of people together, and that's, just what I'm doing because it's a brief discussion. So I'm sure there are lots of people that would disagree with this. In addition, I'm going after one route to superintelligence. That is one in which the enhancements are said to increasingly involve replacement of parts of the biological brain with AI components. Okay, so I'm focusing on the idea of brain chips. Now, I'm going to talk about some projects in a second to kind of add a little bit more detail to this. But I just want to say that in answer to the question, well, isn't this speculative? I'd like to just raise the issue that transhumanism is actually an influential view right now on the future of the mind. So for example, I'm in Washington, DC a lot with Congress. I work with them on tech policy in the United States. And I hear a lot of that with congressional aides, with members of the media, with tech CEOs, and even members of government. Furthermore, I think it ties into a really fascinating philosophical issue. Does consciousness transcend the brain? So you can't test for whether there's a soul, but you can, I think, test for whether there are conscious machines. I've proposed tests together with a colleague at Princeton, Edwin Turner. So I think these discussions point at a really interesting issue of whether consciousness could transcend the biological brain. And it gives us a new arena for discussing these issues. And it shows also that these issues are relevant even if you're an atheist. Further, I think the issues are important from the vantage point of cognitive science, which says that the mind is something like a software program. So a lot of people in cognitive science hold this view. And in Artificial You, the final substantive chapter actually discusses whether the mind is truly a software program and what it would even mean. I actually take a critical position, even though I believe the brain is computational. And finally, the issues are important because we shouldn't commit what the historian Michael Best calls a Jetsons fallacy. So in the cartoon, The Jetsons, and in Star Wars, notice that the humans themselves are depicted as unenhanced. But importantly, all around them are these fancy robots. Well, in reality, the future will probably not just have all these fancy robotic bells and whistles with super intelligent AI. It will also be the case that AI changes humans as well. It goes inside the head. Give me one second here. Sorry, I just have to answer this really quick. Okay, so now let's go on to talk about today's technological trends. Okay, so you might wonder if there's any research in this area yet. And just to kind of mention a few projects, Elon Musk, for example, has commented that humans need to keep up with AI by having some sort of merger of biological and machine intelligence. To this end, he started a few years ago a company called Neuralink, which has as its aim the creation of an implantable brain chip, allowing data from your brain to travel wirelessly to your digital devices. Now, he's been making a lot of progress on this. So, for example, you can go on YouTube and you can see a video of the chip implanted in the head of a pig, and you can see the neural recording imagery, and that it is indeed a wireless technology. And furthermore, recently he uploaded a video of a great ape. So this is now waiting for approval for human clinical trials. And you might ask, well, why would that get approval? And the answer is that there are all kinds of people with locked-in syndrome, with mobility issues, paraplegics and whatnot, who need help, desperately need help. And so by moving in the therapeutic directions with this kind of technology, you enable people to communicate. And if they can't communicate, if they can't move, it's important that they have this. But Musk's hope is that it becomes as commonplace as LASIK, that we use it there, not just as a therapy, but as an enhancement. There are lots of other technologies as well. There's the artificial hippocampus, which is under development by Ted Berger at the University of Southern California, joint with the Defense Department. And that is far along. That's actually in phase 2 clinical trials in the United States. So it's being used in human cases now. That is there to enable memory encoding for individuals who don't have a working hippocampus. That's very, very important. DARPA has been doing a range of work. That's the emerging technology wing of the US Defense Department. Facebook has been doing a lot. That scares me. And Kernel, which is a brain enhancement and therapy company devoted specifically to the development of these chips. The list is actually pretty long. I mean, I'm sure Google's doing work on this. I mean, my sense is that all the big tech companies, the big 4, are on this. And they see it actually as a sort of future wave of development of artificial intelligence. Okay. All right, so all this being said, let's turn to some philosophy. So I want to talk now about a sort of skeptical approach to these issues. I'm all for upgrading the brain, God knows. But sadly, I'm somewhat skeptical of some of this. Okay, so in some recent op-eds, I propose that there are design ceilings on human cognitive and perceptual enhancement. So by design ceilings, I mean limitations on human intelligence enhancement that aren't imposed by evolution or even tech. They're philosophy-based, believe it or not. And of course, neurotech will impose limits. Obviously, I mean, there'll be medical limitations on what one can do. But as a philosopher, I think there's a hidden arena here that's been ignored, and that is involving philosophical issues. So I'll talk about those because that's my job. I'm a philosopher. Today, I'll raise a few of these ceilings. I have a whole list of ceilings that I'll be talking about in my next book. There's so many weird cases I'd be happy to share with you. But what I'm interested in doing now is talking about what I call the consciousness ceiling, which arises if microchips fail to underlie conscious experience. And I'm also interested in what's called a self-ceiling, which is a point beyond which a person who attempts to enhance is no longer the same individual that they were before, because the enhancement procedure, so-called enhancement, causes the individual to cease to exist. Okay, that's not good. So here's the consciousness ceiling. So here's what consciousness is. And I imagine you're a pretty sophisticated group of people and you know this already, but just in case, consciousness is that felt quality of experience. So, when you see the hues of a sunset or you smell the aroma of your coffee, it feels like something to be you. And it's always that way whenever you're awake and even when you're dreaming. And that's what makes life so wonderful, but also so difficult. Consciousness is that felt quality of our inner experience. Philosophers, of course, have been fascinated by this. You could look, for example, at David Chalmers' work on the hard problem of consciousness, which asks why we even need to be conscious. Well, bearing in mind the nature of consciousness, I want to discuss whether microchips are the right stuff for consciousness. So here's a quotation by Richard Dawkins. We were in a film together called Super Sapiens about human brain enhancement. And he said, "It's not obvious to me that a replacement of our species by our own technological creations would necessarily be a bad thing." Well, in response to Dawkins, I think we need to bear in mind that if non-conscious machines supplanted biological intelligence, the technological singularity would actually be a nightmare because it would be the end of consciousness on Earth, okay? So what I mean by this is that if you bought Merge, if AI turned out to not be capable of having that felt quality of experience, if it couldn't be conscious, merging would obviously be a really, really bad idea. Because if microchips are the wrong stuff for consciousness, then a mind-machine merger could not happen. If you tried, you would lose your consciousness and your mind would arguably no longer even exist. So you would hit an enhancement wall. AI, in contrast, wouldn't hit such a wall because it wouldn't be conscious in that scenario and it would be free to outthink us. So it could get vastly smarter, but we humans would reach a ceiling with our enhancement. So you might be able to enhance parts of the brain that don't underlie conscious experience, but when it came to the parts of the brain that do, you'd be unable to enhance without losing consciousness itself. Okay, well, that was the consciousness ceiling. And now let me turn to a different one. Suppose that consciousness didn't turn out to be a problem, that machines could be conscious and that microchips could underlie conscious experience. Should you then buy Merge? Well, in order to understand whether you should enhance, you need to actually understand what you are to begin with. This gets me to the second ceiling that I'll introduce today, which I call the self ceiling. So you would need to ask the following question: what is a self or person? And would you continue to exist if you bought Merge? Or would you actually replace yourself by someone or something else? So if you're replacing all parts of your brain, or even much of your brain, at what point do you no longer exist, if any? And at what point are you ending your own life and actually maybe giving rise to another being who has some sort of a relationship to you? It came from you, maybe something like almost like a parent relationship or an ancestor relationship. Okay, well, this is an issue that goes back a long way in contemporary philosophy. Particularly, it's from the field of metaphysics. So there's an area of metaphysics that studies the metaphysics of the person. It's called personal identity, that literature. And an example is just consider the metaphysics of, say, an object. We'll do that before we get to a person, like an espresso machine. Suppose you're reading a metaphysics book and you decide that you're going to ask the barista in the coffee house where you're reading about the metaphysics of the espresso machine. So you say, at what point would this machine no longer exist if you changed it? So if you change its color, would it exist? Yes, of course, it would seem to still exist. If you break off a piece, would it exist? Yes. But what if you take out a science fiction ray gun and you blow it to smithereens? Does it still exist? You'd probably say no. Well, that indicates something. It indicates that there are certain features, or what philosophers call properties, of things which a thing needs to have in order to continue existing. Those are your essential properties, or in the case of the espresso machine, the machine's essential properties. And debating the issue is tricky, even in the case of an espresso machine. And I'm not sure there is a definitive, uncontroversial position that one can take. And I'm not sure how you would even run a test to confirm whether your theory is correct. That's why it's philosophy. Well, taking the espresso example back to the person, people have or seem to have essential properties. So for example, suppose you're a very religious person, then you would say that the soul is essential to who you are. That would be, having a soul would be an essential property. So even if enhancing through a Center for Mind Design brings super intelligence, makes this being super smart, if you want that being to be you, it shouldn't involve, the process of enhancement shouldn't involve eliminating your essential properties. Because if you did that, then you would kill yourself accidentally. So you wouldn't really be enhancing or merging with artificial intelligence. The technology would actually benefit someone or something else, but not you. So this is a self-sealing. That's what I call it. It's a point beyond which the person who attempts to enhance is no longer the same individual they were before, because the procedure causes that individual who sought enhancement to cease to exist. So what are we then? Like I said, I've been drawing a lot on issues in philosophy. And there was this literature on the nature of the person that actually explores different essential properties for persons. So you could, for example, be a brain-based materialist. That is to say that you think that your survival depends essentially on your brain and perhaps other elements of your nervous system. Okay, so that's a very popular view. You could alternately accept what's called the psychological continuity view, which says that you are your memories and your ability to reflect on yourself, and your overall configuration, your psychology. You could be a patternist, for example. That's one kind of psychological continuity view. And that is a view I'll talk about briefly because it's a view that a lot of transhumanists hold. Patternism, then, just to say, a few things about patternism, says that what's essential to you is your computational configuration, the sensory systems and subsystems of the brain, the association areas that integrate these basic systems, the neural circuitry making up domain general reasoning, your attention, your memory, and so on. Together, all this forms an algorithm, and you are that algorithm that your brain computes. You're not the brain itself, you are the algorithm. Sort of like the Uber algorithm that pulls together what each module of the brain is up to. And that view is called patternism, and that's a view that people like Ray Kurzweil and Nick Bostrom seem to hold. Well, that's the transhumanist view. And then there's a view that isn't associated with too many transhumanists, although I've heard there are Christian transhumanists out there. And this is the soul view. And on this view, your essence is your soul or mind, understood as non-physical and distinct from your body. There's also a no self view. And this too is associated with transhumanists. The no self view is really interesting. On this view, the self is an illusion and there are bundles of impressions, but there's really no underlying self. So this is associated famously with the philosopher Hume. And Nietzsche also held this view. He wrote that the I is a grammatical fiction. That's one of his aphorisms. And others, of course, the Buddha believed that, or according to many people, believe that there is really no self or no person. And then the contemporary philosopher Derek Parfit also held this view. And I think Parfit was the one who, in particular, gave it its recent popularity. Okay, so how does all this connect up with the self-sealing? Well, quickly, because I want to close up and have some conversations, let me just say that each of these views has implications about whether you really could merge with AI. That's what I really want to leave you with. Because if you did walk into a Center for Mind Design and you tried to merge with AI, you would really have to look at your own particular view of the nature of the person and ask yourself how confident you were in it. I mean, and you'd have to have a view as well. I mean, you don't just want to haphazardly order up a bunch of brain enhancements because, you know, as I like to tell my students, metaphysics in this case is actually a matter of life and death. So stay awake in metaphysics class. So brain-based materialism, for example, on this view, you know, if you are really just your brain and your nervous system, you really can't change substrates at all. So you can't merge with AI by scooping out parts of your biological brain. You would actually die if you replaced too much of your brain, right? I call that brain drain. And you wouldn't even know at what point it happened. I mean, like, I don't think there's any way to tell. I mean, would 20% replacement end up killing the self and creating maybe a new self, 30%, 40%? You just don't know. Okay, well, on this view then, if you actually have this as your philosophical position, and I think a lot of people do, that actually changes what you should do scientifically if you were developing brain enhancement technology. So it actually changes the future direction of science. On this view, neurotechnology should aim to develop biological brain enhancements and minimal AI enhancements that don't replace or damage key parts of the brain, because you wouldn't want to develop, quote, enhancement technology that killed people, right? So, I mean, this really changes things. So I don't think it entails that one wouldn't, you know, want enhancement. I mean, I think there would still be transhumanists out there, but I think one might look at other options. So you might look at genetic enhancement. You might look at what I call an intellectual exoskeleton, where, you know, at the beginning of the day, you put on some intellectual aids, if you will, but you can take them off. Or you might look at minimal AI enhancements, like maybe 1 or 2 artificial brain circuits. Okay, now, what if you instead believed in a soul? In this case, your decision to enhance depends on your particular religion. And in that case, you might want to consult with your religious advisor. So in no way, shape, or form should you assume that just because these brain enhancement products are sold, that it would be advisable from your religious standpoint to merge with artificial intelligence. You would really have to ask, what would happen to my soul? So that's a very deep issue. And then what if you have the no self view? Well, in this case, you don't merge with AI at all, because there's no such thing as you. So I just want to call that to your attention. I mean, you might still want to merge, I mean, you might still want to enhance. Let me explain what I mean. So if you're at a Center for Mind Design, you might decide that since there's no such thing as survival at all, because there's really no self, why not make sure that this future being is ultra smart? So in that case, you might consider certain ethical principles, the greatest good for the greatest number or something like that. You might have a sort of position that thinks that this would be a better future for others, because, they're still beings. It's just that there's no persisting self. Okay, what about patternism? So remember, I talked about the psychological continuity view, and I said that the transhumanists often upheld a version of that view called patternism. So for example, Ray Kurzweil holds that view. Well, here's a problem. We don't actually know when a pattern continues versus when a pattern ends. So think about that kind of algorithm that is said to be you, as sort of, it's not at all clear, just, to make this more explicit. An algorithm, that's just lines of code. So presumably a patternist would say certain changes in the algorithm are kosher, and certain ones are not. And you don't really know, and the transhumanist has not told us what changes are compatible with the survival of the person. So maybe, for example, deleting a few bad chess playing habits is fine, but what about a more serious mind sculpting endeavor, like adding several brain chips that gives you new cognitive abilities? It's really not clear that you should merge with AI, that you could merge, that is, even according to the transhumanist favorite view. Well, then my conclusion is kind of humble, I guess. I think all of these views are really interesting. And frankly, sometimes I'm a fan of the no self view. And at other times I have something like a view that there's something that science just hasn't uncovered yet, involving both consciousness and the survival of the self. But that leads me to take a stance of what I call metaphysical humility, because I don't think you can really prove any of these views. For example, you can't definitively prove that there's a soul. So that view says that claims about survival that involve a person transferring their mind to a new substrate and making drastic alterations to the brain, or making drastic alterations to the brain, should be carefully scrutinized. So we need to bear in mind that there's actually intense disagreement about all these things in the philosophy literature. So even enhancements that just involve gradually replacing parts of your brain without enhancing cognitive or perceptual skills could be risky if you had that brain view, if the brain is essential to the self. I would take a limited approach if I wanted to enhance. So removable devices, biological enhancements, and implants to the brain that don't remove existing brain tissue. And my job as a philosopher is to inform the public of risks and hope that people listen, and people, don't just do what tech companies say they should do. I think we need to restore more humanity, when it comes to understanding how to develop our technologies. If we can do something technologically, it doesn't necessarily mean we should. Well, that leads me to the big picture. Here's some takeaways, and these are based on my work with NASA, where I explored intelligence at a more universal scale. I thought about the shape of alien intelligences. Not that there are any necessarily. I'm on the fence. I think I'm happy to talk about all of that. But I think that it's important to think about how all this relates to possible intelligences beyond Earth. So, I like a humble approach. To quote one of my favorite thinkers, Carl Sagan, in the film Contact, he wrote the book as well as the script, I believe. And there was an alien that had a first contact with a human, Jodie Foster's character. And it said, "You're an interesting species, an interesting mix. You're capable of such beautiful dreams and such horrible nightmares. Well, I think this is true. Let's get it right. Technological prowess is not enough when it comes to these big ticket questions about the future of the mind. To flourish, we actually need to appreciate the philosophical issues lying beneath the algorithms. Okay, so I'm going to open this up now to Q&A. Thanks for bearing with me.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just give you my 2 cents. I mean, you've all clearly thought so deeply about the mind, and I'm just like a child when it comes to these issues. I mean, we all are, right? So I say this in all humility, and I just think of things from a metaphysical standpoint. I work again in contemporary metaphysics. And so I engage with debates, for example, about panpsychism and dualism in its traditional guise, like Descartes, for example, versus materialism. And then I think about the extended mind view and whether that's possible. And of course, that relates to machine consciousness deeply. So I guess my own position is that something like panpsychism may be right. Not quite panpsychism, though, but something like it. And I take fundamental reality to be really a matter of physics in the structural sense. So when it comes to physics, physics is good at giving causal relations, explaining the structure of things. It's not really good at explaining this may sound funny, but whether matter is minded, what matter is. Like Stephen Hawking put it well, as usual. He said, what breathes fire into the equations? And physics is great with the equation side. But it doesn't explain what it is that instantiates the processes that it identifies, what matter is beyond just dispositions. And that's a debate that is very vigorous in metaphysics. And my own view is that the best answer is one in which particles or strings, whatever are the fundamental ingredients of reality, are not literally minds, but they have a sort of proto-experiential element to them. And they have a disposition such that in certain configurations, you get mindedness in a full-blown sense. So that is very close to panpsychism without the view that there's agency in the particles. I think that's a little too strong. That view is sometimes called pan-protopsychism. And I guess what I would add to that, beyond just what's in the literature already, is that the argument for that is stronger than people think. I think it would be something like an inference to the best explanation for a variety of phenomena. My argument for that, I can't lay it out here, but it's akin. I don't know if any of you know of the philosopher David Lewis, but I like in his On the Plurality of Worlds, his approach where he laid out a bunch of explanatory benefits of positing possible worlds as ontological elements in reality. My own view is that you need to postulate that matter has an experiential element in order to get the most explanatory punch in the domain of metaphysics. So that's my position. And I also think that it dovetails with the work that's going on quantum gravity right now. And that the very same things that theories of quantum gravity are talking about as being fundamental, or at least beneath the layer of space-time. So there's a lot of talk right now in certain theories of quantum gravity about space-time emergence. So like string theory, and other theories. And I think that's right. I think space-time is emergent. I see a lot of convergence in the different theories of physics right now. I would add, though, that I think there's a more fundamental layer of time. I think time's two-dimensional. But anyway, I think that the entities which are fundamental and which the theories operate on are actually the very same entities I'm talking about in my metaphysical theories.
I don't know whether you know this book, Susan, The Flip by Jeff Kripal, because he shares your view that there is a trend towards various forms of panpsychism and away from more crude forms of materialism. And that's interesting. He talks about cosmic humanism. That's a term that he uses.
Oh, that's really cool.
And then my other question rising out of what you just said is are you familiar with the sort of philosophical work of David Bohm, the physicist David Bohm? Because he was Princeton with at one point with Einstein, and there's an incredible film which you may or may not have seen called Infinite Potential, which is the film of his life, with a lot of people who knew him. And it strikes me that the way that he approached this, his philosophy of physics, if you like, is a very interesting way of bringing these questions together. And then Shantina may want to talk about this, because they're doing a lot of work and features and programs on David Bohm at the Pari Center in Italy. And there's some events coming up in the next few weeks.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. I appreciate that. I just wrote down that movie. I can't wait to watch it. And yeah, I've been meaning actually to delve into David Bohm's thinking. It sounds very fascinating.
I think it will add kind of another sort of dimension to some of the things you've been saying. Anyway, let's go on to Tuvi.
First of all, Susan, thank you very much for very, very interesting presentations and your research behind this. I would like to add something and to ask you at the same time, because the basic assumption is, first of all, what is the reality at all, okay? Because what we can see with our five senses is only one part of the reality, the more physical reality. But there is other dimension. And are you familiar with Federico Fagin, the inventor of the microchip? Are you familiar with him? So first of all, I strongly recommend that you have a meeting with him. Doesn't mean physical meeting, but knows him very, very well. I tell you why, okay? Because he comes from physics. He's a great inventor. He was the inventor of the microchip and was in charge of Intel, of all the developing, the first chips, the first microchip and others. But after a few years of developing these chips, he himself has experience, which is very important. And I'm sure that you heard about type of spiritual experience, when people have got some experience which the science cannot explain. When it's happened to the different scientists, it starts to open the mind to see that the reality is not just we see here, especially when the people are very grounded, like a physicist or doctor, etc. And that's what happened to him. And then he started to research if machine can be conscious or not. And he came to the conclusion there is no way that machine, and he understands machine very well, you can be sure that machine can be conscious. There is some quantity or some quality that beyond this. And this is another dimension of the physics. And that's what I want to come back to this. So in addition to the physics dimension that we can see, there is another dimension. And this is recognized on the one hand in physics, as you know, doesn't matter if string theory and other theory, it's clear that it's not enough. The four dimension of three physical dimension and time is not enough, the four dimension. And there is another dimension. Just to let you know, in Kabbalah, they call the fifth dimension the dimension of consciousness, or dimension of our choice, which is another dimension. And this is, I'm sure that this is what's missing in physics today, because in physics, there is no explanation of will at all, intention. And of each, doesn't matter if you think it's illusion or not, but if you do experiment, you can decide if to choose to use and change this finger or this finger. You have some choice. Doesn't matter if a big choice or a small one. We have some free choice. And this cannot explain in physics. Also the time about, I don't want to get to details, But because of this, we have to go to the fundamental, what is reality and what is us and what is our consciousness. And when you go deeper to this, it's clear, and you mentioned about the panpsychism, what is reality? There is a consciousness which is fundamental, and all of us is part of it. If you go to this and understand this and feel it, both logically and by experiment, then we can see that machine, doesn't matter how sophisticated, will never have the ability to have same consciousness as us. They can be more intelligent of having choice and of calculation and many things. And also Penrose, Roger Penrose, who got Nobel Prize in 2020, he, a few years before this, part of his research was that the mind cannot be calculated at all. It's not algorithm. It's beyond algorithm. And this was and this is research from philosophical and mathematics together. So I just want to, sorry that for a long speech, that there is something beyond all this. And you mentioned, you have got humility to say these things I don't understand. And this is really the situation. And people like Kurzweig, etc., they don't have this experience of people like Federico Fagin. When they've got this experience, you can see the reality is more than this. Sorry for the long speech, but I hope that you understand me.
Okay, yeah, can I respond?
Definitely, that's what I'm waiting for you.
Yeah.
All right. So I agree with some of that. Some things I don't agree with, though.
Yes.
Okay, so I suspect there's more than what we know. I just think the older I get, the more I appreciate how dumb we are.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
I'll just say that. I'll just put that out there. I mean, when I was younger, it's really easy to be a materialist. But then when you start really thinking about consciousness in the brain, you realize, like, especially if you look at the debates on the neural basis of consciousness, yes, we don't really have any kind of sense of why we're conscious. I mean, we might be able to say this part of the brain lights up more. But even those debates are a mess, to be honest. And I don't think there's any explanation found in science for why there is a felt quality of experience.
Yes.
This gets back to the hard problem. Okay, so I think we agree on that. But I mean, the free will debate is a separate issue than consciousness.
I agree.
So I actually am not at all convinced there's anything, in which humans go outside of the laws of nature and have some sort of free will. I'm more convinced that there's something strange going on with consciousness, but all of that could be lawfully determined. And that may just be a matter of understanding the laws of nature better.
Sorry, what is law of nature? When you say law of nature, what I'm saying is that the physics today missing part of the laws. They're missing part of the laws. They don't understand what is will and intention in physics. There is no explanation at all to will and intention, not for us as a human being. Law and intention and will are missing in physics. If you think about this deeply, as a philosopher, there is missing something very, very fundamental missing in physics.
I'm not convinced. I'm not saying physics is complete, but I'm also not saying that there is a thing as free will in the deep sense. So there's different issues here with free will. I used to teach the debate on free will at the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, for years, people don't always understand that there are even compatibilist positions out there where free will and determinism are compatible. I think that what you're saying is something called, a sort of pure free will, or what is called libertarianism. And I have not found any arguments that are definitive or even strong for that position, I have to say. But that doesn't mean consciousness isn't something that today's science has lacked understanding about. And again, I am sympathetic to a kind of panpsychist position. The other thing I would say, to get back to your point about Penrose, is that I never found his arguments convincing. And believe me, I've looked at about 15 different versions of the view because he's written so much about it, and people will ask me. I've had members of Congress who've picked up his books. I am so not convinced that there's anything about Gödel's argument that entails anything about consciousness or free will. Although I certainly love Gödel. Love the art.
New biography of him.
So you don't feel that you've got any will? you yourself, Susan, you don't feel that you've got any will, so the will is just illusion, will or intention? There is nothing like this. It's just a illusion, and not just human will. Not just human will. The will is part of something in nature. It's a bird who can decide this.
I am happy to take a concessionary position where
Yes.
one says that free will and determinism are compatible. That's called compatibilism. Or, I mean, if you ask me what my personal position
Yes.
is, I quite like just pure determinism. I mean, you know, the debates are tricky because what happens with the compatibilist view is people try to say that there's a sense in which both positions, determinism and the position that there's free will, are compatible, and they play a lot of word games to try to make those views compatible. And if you want to do that, I'm okay conceding that, but my own preference is actually that we have laws. In fact, again, this goes back to the primacy of causation and process.
Exactly, exactly.
And so when you take that kind of a position, it gives a role to laws of nature. And I don't think we break free of the causal laws.
The only problem is that the causal law are missing. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, we could go on rather a long time on this
okay,
topic. I just like to bring in one slightly different angle there, because I think this sort of whole free will determinism dichotomy as set up in philosophy should be recast within systems theory, because you know, we are part of various different systems, including physical systems, biological systems, social systems, family systems, and all of these are going to influence the way that we think. So there's an interplay rather than a sense of one being a primary and the other being secondary. So
definitely.
I don't think the sort of polarized positions that the traditional in philosophy are terribly helpful. And they need to be updated in terms of systems theory.
Yes,
that's my own.
I agree.
Thank you for that. I'm really happy to hear that. That does make great sense. Yeah, I'm lucky now because my center at Florida that I just founded is really good in that. I've got a lot of new colleagues like Scott Kelso, you know, a lot of dynamic systems theorists and complexity studies people. So to me, I think you're exactly right. And, you know, getting into issues about what is a system, that's really rich and interesting.
Yeah, I just want to finish by bringing up a sort of scientific and medical network perspective to bring in the transpersonal, if you like, because we produced this Galileo report, and many of our senior members, as it were, have been very interested, like Peter Fenwick, in near-death experiences, in ESP, in evidence for survival, children who remember previous lives. There's a huge sort of evidence base of this, which none of which is taken into account by any of the transhumanists, because they have this very fixed understanding that everything can be explained by patternism or by the brain-based materialism. And it seems to us, I think sort of generally, as it were, that we need to bring that aspect, the sort of transcendent, transpersonal aspect, into these debates as well. So get a finer texture, if you like, and I'll send you that link as well. I'm going to overload you with stuff, but do you have any response to that, or any observations?
No, I'm really interested. I mean, I just suspect, just as a person who's been on the planet for 50 years now, that there's more than what meets the eye, and when you hear over and over again stories from people you trust, it makes you suspicious that we're missing the boat. And I think all of us feel, I see a lot of nods. I mean, it's hard to deny this stuff when you have, I had an ex-husband who told me of a, crazy thing that happened to him. And I know he's not making it up. So, I think a lot of us have had these kind of things happen. And I look forward to a time when science does understand it. It could be that when we do create greater than human AI, or even AGI that thinks differently than us, it will catch more of these kinds of things and give us more of a sense of what's going on. I mean, it may be that the human mind isn't so good at reasoning about some of this stuff, but maybe machine minds will be.
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think, I mean, you've actually raised another very interesting issue, is that almost all of us here would be able to report the sort of story you're probably talking about. But within science and the academic world, people don't feel they can talk about it, and they feel they'll be ridiculed by their colleagues if they start talking about it.
Yeah.
When in fact, it's not true at all. And if we could be honest with each other, and be open, we could actually make a lot more progress in this whole field.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I mean, I think the older you get, the more confident you are that you can talk about this without being brutalized. But I mean, certainly I don't feel like I could give a talk on it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
If I was at a conference or like in Q&A, sure. I mean, it's okay to be speculative.
Yep, absolutely. Yes.
But I can't say that I have any definitive answers. So I have nothing to say that would be useful.
No, well, I think that's fair enough. And I think what I've really enjoyed about your presentation this evening and your responses is really the measured and balanced way that you've dealt with things. And you've got enormous knowledge, and not only of the field, but also the way that technology is going, the way that the capitalism, the economic system is going. And it's very, very hard to understand the system and its trajectory and evolution. But I think we've learned a lot this evening from your insights. And so I'd like to thank you very, very much indeed. And I think, as you said yourself, I think we've had an extremely stimulating exchange, and that I've certainly enjoyed it. And I think everybody else here has as well.
Well, I really enjoyed you all, and I'd love to get on your mailing list to learn of your talk. I mean, I really appreciate your ideas and your interdisciplinarity. And I'll be reading all the comments in the chat as soon as this is over. I'm sure I'll learn from that. But I've really actually learned. It's funny because I'm at the point where I'm like completely zoomed out, right?
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed this, and thank you to everybody for listening. For because it is a zoomed out situation now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope I run into you all in person.
Well, we'll let you get back to your dogs and the rest of your day. Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Susan, and see you all very soon.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye then. Bye.